The facts are these. The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen Pushing Daisies, you may want to before watching this video.
His dog Digby was 3 years, 2 weeks, 6 days, 5 hours, and 9 minutes old. And not a minute older. This was the moment young Ned realized he wasn't like the other children. Young Ned could touch dead things and bring them back to life.
In my Boardwalk Empire video, I mentioned the Boardwalk series pilot was the best pilot ever produced. And yet, as I edited the video, a potential usurper to the title kept sneaking into my thoughts. Fantasy crime procedural Pushing Daisies debuted in 2007, but the pre-release hubbub was unusually modern day. The show's pilot leaked online, and the consensus of the viewers was, give it to us. Give it to us now. Lest you think Pushing Daisies is the ultimate underdog to the Martin Scorsese-directed Boardwalk Empire premiere, the Pushing Daisies pilot was actually helmed by Barry Sonnenfeld of Men in Black fame.
I'll put my hands on my head.
The show only ran for 22 episodes over 2 seasons, the first truncated by the writer's strike and the second halved due to lack of viewers. It lives on to this day as one of those 10 series canceled too early list toppers that few people actually bother to go out of their way to watch. Some claim the behind-the-scenes drama is what sank the ship, others attest the building hurricane of the writer's strike was the only thing that eked the show through to a second season renewal. Over a decade after its cancellation, Pushing Daisies deserves to be remembered for more than just the bizarre circumstances of its demise, which is not exactly to say I want this show resurrected. These recent show revivals, much like The Living Dead, bring us all more horror than joy. I guess you could say I'm only here to give the show a touch, wake it up for a moment, and let it tell us its story. Start the timer. This is Pushing Daisies.
She read about people she could never be, on adventures she would never have. Life was good enough until one day it wasn't. Chuck wanted more. But at Boutique Travel Boutique, she got more than she bargained for.
Pushing Daisies is a private detective series about Ned the Pie Maker. Ned was born with the peculiar gift to resurrect the dead with a single touch. This power comes with 2 caveats. Keep a dead thing alive for more than a minute, and another living thing of the same or similar species has to die. And touch a resurrected thing a second time, it dies again forever.
The peach is never brown. The dead fruit in his hands becomes ripe with everlasting flavor, as long as he only touches it once.
This makes Pushing Daisies one of my favorite niche genres of fiction, people with supernatural powers using them for mundane purposes. Most fictional heroes gifted with superpowers set about using them to save the world, but Ned is just moonlighting as a detective to pay the bills. In collaboration with private investigator Emerson Cod, Ned wakes up murder victims, asks them who killed them, then collects the reward.
See that? Simple. Ask a question, you get an answer. There's no room for butt scuttle or misinterpretation. Oh, thank you, Lord, for simple things like my wife did it.
Of course, we wouldn't have much of a show if the cases were all so straightforward, so the circumstances surrounding the deaths are all incredibly bizarre, meaning even 60 seconds of post-life confession leaves barely enough to go on.
That son of a bitch was a damn polygamist.
Harold Hunding was indeed a damn polygamist with multiple misses, of which there were 4.
Rounding out the cast is Ned's loyal waitress at his pie shop, Olive Snook. She harbors a major crush on the pie maker, but his fear of what he'll do with his power if someone he cares about dies leads to Ned shutting himself out from the world. And therein lies the main emotional backdrop of the show. Ned did have someone he cares about die, his childhood sweetheart Chuck. Now they're together again, but tragically they can never touch, lest she get zapped back to the afterlife.
If you're craving something before you die, I recommend where the pie maker makes his pies. But if you're like Chuck, you may enjoy the pie, even after you die.
So Ned has a tenuous business partnership with the stony-hearted detective Cod, unwanted but also sort of jealously wanted affection from Olive, and wanted but impossible to physically reciprocate affection from Chuck. That's a hell of a premise, but rather than feeling rushed or poorly conceived, the tee-up for this in the pilot was somehow equally impossibly endearing.
Charlotte Charles, 28 years, 24 weeks, 3 days, 11 hours, and 51 minutes old, was found floating in the ocean moments after her body was discarded there.
I haven't thought of her since I was 10.
Think of her a lot when you were 10?
Don't remember anything when I was 10.
The pie maker remembers everything.
The series opens on a 5-minute sequence detailing childhood Ned's iterative discovery of the rules governing his power. Naturally, he inadvertently causes the death of his childhood sweetheart's father by resurrecting his mother, then lets his mother receive a second touch, sending her permanently to the grave as well. The flashbacks to our characters' almost comically traumatic youths becomes a once-an-episode occurrence, but the meat and potatoes happen right here. We get acquainted with Ned and Emerson's hustle, then Chuck's murder case gets dropped in their lap, and Ned has to wrestle with resurrecting his old flame. You know, literally. They take a trip to hometown Coeur de Coeur, perhaps my favorite fictional town name, where Ned finds himself unable to re-dead Chuck after undeading her, instead electing to trade the life of a random person to the funeral home, in this case the body-looting funeral director. Then it's high time to find Chuck's killer and settle the score. Off to the races.
But I don't know who killed me. I went to go get ice, and I dropped my room key in the ice maker, and as I was thinking, that was dumb.
As she was thinking that was dumb, Chuck was strangled to death with a plastic sack.
The pilot was, in a way, a victim of its own critical success. In almost any review I see of it back from when it first leaked, the question hanging over everything is, how can this show be sustainable? Is the narrator, who was so well received in the pilot, going to start to grate now that the necessary exposition is out of the way? Are the visuals going to become routine and leave the audience desensitized to them, or worse, simply be slowly phased out? And what elements of the pilot will carry over into the series, when the payoffs to many of these plants seem to have already occurred? They establish Aunt Lily only has one eye so they can cleverly hide Chuck's presence at the climax, and it's also perfectly reasonable to believe her synchronized swimming career was just a setup for how she survives the villain's smiley sack of suffocation.
Didn't I kill you?
I can hold my breath for a long time.
Having seen the entire series, I can safely say that all the speculation of the wind going out of Pushing Daisy's sails was paranoia. We've all been burned by shows that seem too good to be true, it's understandable. That just leaves the one thing we really didn't get much sample of in the pilot, the cases of the week. Pushing Daisies splits its time each episode between overarching plot lines and cases of the week, so we're never entirely narratively adrift, but if the cases were forgettable filler, as is the case with many similarly structured shows, it could leave the show feeling like a pie with an excess of filler. Fortunately, the cases wind up being a strength, not a crutch, like a pie with an excess of filler, but, like in a good way. Like you like it, it's really good filler, you're happy to have a lot of it. Let's break down the weekly investigations. The second episode is pretty much a perfect example of what you can expect. Body turns up at the morgue, and since Ned's got the touch, Ned's got the power, he can get answers.
We're from the government safety place.
Is that a question?
Government safety place.
The victim hasn't a clue who got his goat, so our leads take off to investigate his bizarre place of work. The Stark White Visitor Center for a dandelion-powered car may seem odd, but it's pretty tame by Pushing Daisy's standards. Oh, hi Howard.
Fuck you, Jimmy.
Just like Jane the Virgin, the show's well-spoken narrator isn't just there to help us follow along with the plot as it grows in complexity. Both shows capitalize on the narrators to help us get into our characters' heads, and in Pushing Daisies, this is not just the heads of the leads, but also the victims and killers. Between their 60-second interviews and their endearing flashbacks, some of the victims get surprisingly humanized and you want to see them avenged.
He would remember her hair as being slightly redder, her sweater slightly tighter, but the smile he would get just right.
Most procedurals either leave the Vic as a poster on the wall, or they'll be revealed to be more of a sinister figure as the episode goes on. Anyways, the killer is unmasked, he places our heroes in a death trap, we get a motive flashback, then our heroes narrowly escape while the villain goes to jail. And the death trap feels pretty dire in the second episode.
Chuck pondered why it was she always seemed to die just as things were starting to get good.
Sayonara.
This was the end. All over again.
I felt like a kid again watching the 60s Batman series, just absolutely sure that this time would be the end for Batman and Robin before the commercial break.
The gas is 20 feet high in the chimney. They must be gone. Goodbye, dynamic duo.
So episode 2, titled Dummy, nails the key elements. I'm going to break them down and we'll see how the cases of the week handle them going forward. 1. Interview with a corpse with a peculiar cause of death. These just get better and better as the series goes on. None of the crime scenes reach the level of peculiar that Brian Fuller's next series, Hannibal, would, although both shows do involve a corpse filled with bees. Still, there's a mix of fun prosthetics, creative murder weapons utilized, and cheekily amusing visuals. Nora McQuadee's body being harpooned to a lighthouse, causing her parka to melt and resemble a fried egg, I especially enjoyed. In addition to that murder weapon, we have the following in sequential order. A plastic sack, a crash test experiment, Ned's magic finger, a crop duster, a horse, poisoned almond coffee creamer, an exploding scratch and sniff book, a vat of taffy, a baseball bat, a swarm of bees, poisoned makeup, a pig, a sword, an exploding pork bun steamer, concrete utilized in a magic escape trick, a chandelier, a deep fryer, a harpoon gun, Ned's magic finger again, an escalator, the water current of a hydroelectric plant, and a shark. 2. The investigation occurs almost entirely at some unusual location. You've got stuff like the Friends for Hire escort service, but even the more conventional locations get a cartoonishly weird spin, such as the Chinese restaurant that conducts illegal poker games using food instead of cards.
You buy in at the table, each plate is a card and the meats are the 4 suits, shrimp, pork, chicken, beef. The appetizers represent different numbers. Other than that, it's traditional 5-card draw.
The cases aren't exactly brain teasers. In contrast with a typical procedural where the number of suspects pushes double digits, there's about 2 to 4 potential killers each episode, and basic pattern recognition will allow you to deduce the culprit consistently. Of the 6 strange corporations Emerson and Co. find themselves investigating, the Dandelion Car Company, Snuppy's Puppies, Betty's Bees, My Best Friend Inc., The Bellman, and Dicker's Department Store, only one of the CEOs is not the killer. I'm not complaining, far from it. I don't derive much pleasure from trying to guess the killer in Case of the Week stories where any guy with hands is a potential suspect. I find that sort of episode structure tends to not stick with me, even a few hours after I finished it. But with the time pushing Daisies is able to devote to each potential murderer, all of these episodes and characters have stuck with me even half a decade since I last watched the show. 3. The villain places the heroes in mortal danger as their motives are unveiled. This is the only bullet point that tends to stumble a bit as the show goes on, because occasionally it feels superfluous. Usually the weapons or death traps our leads encounter are, if not actually threatening, intriguingly bizarre. But sometimes it's just a gun or a knife, and sometimes episodes give off the vibe they don't feel the villain is quirky enough for the show's standards, so they have to tack on a bizarre backstory of tenuous relation to the plot during the climax. It's an uncommon occurrence, but strangles the rising action of the narrative when it does crop up. And lastly, 4. Someone learns a life lesson relating to the traumatic childhood flashback we saw in the cold open. These are sweet without being too saccharine, and some I found genuinely moving in their own way. People are learning and growing and overcoming complex anxieties they've harbored due to childhood traumas. Wait, are we sure the whole resurrecting the dead thing is still the most fantastical element of the show?
The pie maker considered how not telling Chuck the truth about her father was a lot like being locked in a prison. Then he considered how being locked in a prison was actually much worse than some silly metaphor about truth.
Speaking of saccharine versus cynical, if you're just looking at the visuals of the show and not hearing dialogue, you might think the tone is going to be unbearably feel-good and twee. Scrubs had been on for a little over half a decade by the time Pushing Daisies aired, and while it didn't share the same garish visual style, it did incorporate fantasy dream sequences similar to Pushing Daisy's more self-indulgent moments. I also found the boundless optimism of the Scrubs main cast insufferable at times, but Scrubs smartly balanced it out with excessively mean-spirited side characters you could project your frustrations onto. Pushing Daisies operates the exact opposite way. While the world around them is chipper and bright, Ned and Emerson have grown cynical due to their line of work.
You're taking money from blind children?
I suppose I could pay my bills with blind kids' smiles, but their money is a lot easier.
That being said, Ned and his girlfriend Chuck aren't perfect characters. A love story where the lovers can't touch was more of a sour fruit baked into the sweet premise, as it becomes apparent after a few episodes that they've already got all the mileage they're going to get out of it. Ned has the goldmine of childhood traumas and unrepentant anxiety to keep him interesting, even as things on the Chuck relationship front start to feel a little forced. Chuck, on the other hand, occasionally takes us on a river cruise down the boring creek. Lonely tourist Charlotte Charles died her first time out after a lifetime of being a shut-in, and her characterization is at its best when the writing leans into her wonder at the world and thirst for exploration. When Chuck's adventurous nature isn't at the forefront, she basically turns into that friend's girlfriend you always hope won't tag along with him when you're having a party. Actually, she literally canonically is that. Emerson Cod and Olive Snook are the real MVPs of the series. When Ned is acting cold and emotionally unavailable, Olive is there to give him a reality check, bouncing between kind and sassy depending on the events of the episode at hand.
I'll be your punching bag, jab all your misplaced anger away. But you should know Chuck feels awful and wants to apologize.
For what? I ain't mad at Chuck. I'm mad at you.
I didn't do anything.
And when Ned, or Chuck, or Olive, or anyone in the series starts to veer too far into cutesy adorability, Emerson can act as the merciful audience surrogate and shut it down with little concern for courtesy. That isn't to say we're operating on Guardians of the Galaxy tone where every sincere moment has to be punctuated with a joke right after. Pushing Daisies reads the room expertly. They know when to let a moment land, and when someone in the writer's room let too many teardrops fall on the first draft as the music swells, so Emerson needs to interject.
That is more comfortable with you people like cry.
Oh, you can cry. It's okay.
It is not okay for a grown-ass man to weep in public with a bunch of happy families enjoying pie.
Speaking of the swelling music, the soundtrack is fantastic. They aren't kidding when they say the score is half of where your emotions come from in movies, TV, and video games, and it's no wonder the show is able to effortlessly land its heartfelt beats. At least when you can hear them. Omnipresent music is fine when you've got headphones on or the mixing is on point, but the mixing is not always on point in the show. The verbose wordplay-y pitter-patter sometimes gets drowned out by the soundtrack, most notably when there were clearly issues with the audio recording equipment. I'm no expert, and even I'm noticing it. When it's going shot, reverse shot, and one angle sounds consistently fuzzier than the other, maybe it would have been worth the price of admission to do some ADR in post. Also, Kristen Chenoweth singing Hopelessly Devoted to You. Yes. Ellen Green singing Morning Has Broken. Yes. both of them singing an even tweer version of the already twee Birdhouse in Your Soul. No.
Turn that off! Turn it off! Turn it off!
Exactly.
In college, my roommate walked in on me watching this scene, and I kind of wish he'd just walked in on me watching porn instead. Well, Pushing Daisies isn't on the level of Batman the Animated Series, where each episode is individually scored. They do go to the trouble of giving even one-off characters and settings their own leitmotifs. Barry Sonnenfeld infamously blew the budget on the first couple episodes, leaving season 1 to run on financial fumes. I never really noticed. The CG landscapes and architecture look more like miniatures than outright fakes, like something out of the Grand Budapest Hotel. There's a memorable shot that I imagine the director went to a lot of trouble for that only lasts a couple seconds, where a body is hidden in a magic theater and it's recreated like a giant dollhouse. Even forgetting the bizarre corpse reveals, Pushing Daisies is stuffed with striking visuals that stick with you. There's just one thing they do that falls flat on its face. Anytime someone is green screened riding a vehicle or animal in flashback, it looks atrocious. If it's supposed to be a cute little wink-wink filmmaking homage to Hitchcock's use of rear projections, I kinda don't care. I know they do it once during a deliberate The Birds homage, but it looks like something from the Conan O'Brien show. I found my way to checking out Pushing Daisies in part due to the intriguing premise, but the bigger hook for me was the showrunner. Hot off watching Hannibal, I was ready for additional Brian Fuller content, and I went into Pushing Daisies expecting a similar-ish structure to Hannibal. Hannibal is roughly structured as a case of the week with an overarching plot running in the background, and as the series goes on, the overarching plot takes the forefront and the audience is delighted to see it. There's an episode late in season 1 of Hannibal where a totem pole of corpses turns up on the beach, and you figure, we're going to want to devote a good chunk of this episode to whatever the hell is going on here. Guess how much time the entire totem pole plotline takes? 12 minutes. And the audience doesn't care. By that time, we're already waist deep in Will's missing time events, Abigail's role in her father's crimes, and Hannibal, of course, beating people. Totem pole of corpses? What totem pole of corpses? Naturally, Pushing Daisies aired during a time when network television was less experimental. And let's be honest, network television has never been more experimental than Hannibal. I've been over the premise, but let's take a look at the plot of Pushing Daisies. Season 1 has 2 primary arcs. Ned trying to hide Chuck from his aunts, lest they start to question how she came back to life, and Ned trying to hide the rules of his power from Chuck, lest she put 2 and 2 together and realize he's inadvertently responsible for her father's death. The latter starts as a sort of, oh brother, how long is this stupid lie gonna last? And the answer is, fortunately, not long. The beans get spilled satisfyingly early in episode 3 when Emerson is hired to investigate the murder of the funeral home director that Ned cosmically whacked to bring back Chuck.
Already know who killed him.
So the mysterious part is how he was killed?
Already know that too.
Okay, how was he killed and who's the killer?
Yeah. Who is the killer?
The former, protecting Chuck's aunts from the truth, is one of those things that you don't think about as being a plot contrivance in the moment, but looking back on the show, it feels much more like one. Olive Snook gets let in on Chuck supposedly faking her demise quick enough. At best, it feels like Chuck putting Ned's paranoia ahead of her aunt's happiness, and at worst, it makes Ned just look jealous and selfish. Which he is, they address it, but it takes a while to get around to. Feels like a Batman v Superman retroactive justification to a selfish thing the character did in the previous entry. Seasons 1 and 2 were both cut down in their prime, as we discussed earlier. The show starts signaling smell researcher and sewer dweller Oscar Vibenius is going to use his olfactory expertise to sniff out the truth behind Chuck's resurrection. Sorry, Oscar, but we just ran out of time for you. Season 2 takes things in a more interesting direction. Emerson Cod reveals he's trying to track down his missing daughter, and Aunt Lily reveals she's Chuck's mother. Fun little arcs pop up. Ned befriends his magician half-brothers, Olive gets thee to a nunnery, and we even get our first major series villain in grave robber Dwight Dixon. He's played by the always fantastic Stephen Root. Stephen Root is fun in any role, but especially when he's playing a villain role.
We're done buying what you're peddling.
No, Lily, that's not entirely true. More accurate would be, I'm not buying what you're peddling, but Vivian will be right down.
As much fun as Dwight's chewing the scenery is, the conclusion of his storyline can't help but feel like a letdown. The penultimate episode before the mid-series finale has Chuck and Ned plotting to resurrect Chuck's father, conveniently at the same time that both Lily and Dwight are on their way to have a showdown at the cemetery. My mind started racing, and with Hannibal still fresh in my noggin, I anticipated a wild scenario. So Chuck is going to keep her father alive for more than 60 seconds, inadvertently killing her own mother, Aunt Lily. Then we'll do an episode of Cat and Mouse with Dwight that concludes with a final confrontation where Ned wakes Lily just in time to trade her life for the grave robbers. This lets Lily in on the masquerade, at long last, while also generating yet another secret she has to keep from Vivian. It would also give us time to have one last exciting face-to-face with Dwight Dixon. Now maybe you're saying to yourself, get a grip, Slip. That's way too over the top and absurd. To which I would say, over the top and absurd, did you even see the Muskrat Farms episode of Hannibal?
You boys remind me of that German cannibal who advertised for a friend and then ate him. Tragedy being, the penis was overcooked. I ate it anyway. They had to. They committed. But they didn't enjoy it.
So, sure, instead of my grandiose little headcanon there, when Chuck lets her father stay alive, Dwight Dixon becomes the Magic Finger's final destination victim instead. After all the buildup we got for Dwight Dixon being the one to bring our heroes' lives crashing down around them, Emerson casually finding Dwight dead in the dirt isn't the fantastic and exciting payoff I was expecting. I guess it subverts your expectations, you know, if you're into that sort of thing. Kind of feels like if right after the I will kill your family scene with Gustavo Fring, Walter White just turned on the radio the next morning to find out Gus died accidentally choking on a chicken finger at his restaurant.
Here lies Dwight, here lies his gun. He was bad, now he's done. Let's go.
Another strong character arc with a less than rewarding conclusion comes from Chuck's father, who plays into the give your daughter's first boyfriend a hard time sort of jokey trope, but is able to ramp it up a little bit because her first boyfriend actually killed him.
You may be able to scare Charlotte with stories of mobs and pitchforks and torches, but I know the truth. The villagers show they aren't coming for me. No, they're coming for the guy with the magic finger.
Charles may be relieved Ned can't touch his daughter, but he's still concerned with them living together when a single slip-up could spell her doom. Honestly, yeah, sage advice, Pops. He tempts Chuck with the opportunity to run away with him, a temptation that feels reasonable, if not outright better than her situation with the pie maker. She was a shut-in who died on her first shot at seeing the world, and as fun as the Piehole Gang's adventures may be, Ned did basically make her a shut-in again. So the father runs off, but sticks in town long enough to be the guardian angel that shields Emerson and company from taking the blame for Dwight's disappearance. Or was it her father?
It wasn't Chuck's father who cleaned up this particular mess. It was the pie maker's father.
Hey, wait a minute. What happened? What happens next? Come on, let's see the next episode.
That's it?
What?
The show was canceled after that.
This decision was frustrating. A lot of shows that know they're on death's door will endeavor to give themselves season finales that could work as series finales. Season 3 of Community is probably the best example of this. They fucking thought it was all over, man. I really wish Pushing Daisies had this sort of foresight. During the production of Who Shot Mr. Burns, the Simpsons animators created fake endings to throw off their own production team and keep things a secret. And I wish they'd thought to do something similar here. Okay, team, let's record the reveal that it's Ned's father who inexplicably saved them, not Chuck's. But let's also ADR a couple lines and change that one shot of the guy in the booth to make it Chuck's father. You know, just in case something completely unforeseeable happens, like, say, for instance, our show with terminally low ratings gets canceled. That way the ending will, you know, kind of actually make some fucking sense. Fortunately enough, Pushing Daisies was granted a 3-episode renewal order to wrap things up in a satisfying way. Did they succeed? Absolutely yes. Does the Ned's dad thing ever come up again? Nope. Instead, Pushing Daisies brought us home for a safe landing by devoting an episode each to the 3 outstanding major plot lines. Olive's lingering feelings for Ned, Emerson's missing daughter, and Chuck missing her aunts. It's a hat trick. These 3 episodes are spectacular, and even if the 3rd ends with a quick montage of, everything worked out perfect for everyone, at least it didn't end on a cliffhanger, which Brian Fuller reportedly wanted it to. Come on, Brian. Why have you always got to do that to us? So that's the end of Pushing Daisies. It's a fun, engaging, and short watch. Criminally short. You'll feel the withdrawals when you finish it for the first time and want to do the whole thing immediately over again. If you haven't had the pleasure of watching it, check it out. Just enjoy the moment to moment and don't expect those end of episode teases involving the side characters to really amount to anything. There's been talks about reviving the show. There was a season 3 graphic novel and accompanying soundtrack promised for 2011 that never came to pass. The first page was released and captures the voice of the show impressively well. Emerson, Ned, and Chuck are going to dig up Dwight Dixon and ask him what was so valuable about those pocket watches he was hunting for in life. And there's a tease that the killer of the week, or possibly the season, was going to be a riff on Jim Jones. Supposedly this season 3 was going to culminate in the return of Oscar Vibenius and a quote-unquote fresh spin on a zombie apocalypse. At this point, I think we'll just have to take their word for it. The subsidiary of DC Comics that was working on the project was shuttered. There were then talks of a film or stage musical revival in 2014 after the Veronica Mars Kickstarter bore fruit. Nothing since, though, which is actually kind of a shame. Seems like a lot of these cult classics getting resurrected wanted a revival first, and then have to hastily scrabble together what was actually going to be in the revival as an afterthought. If Brian Fuller has really been sitting on some Dynamite Season 3 premise for over a decade, then I hope he gets the chance to make it the way he intends. But if he's just looking to bring it back because it's a popular canceled too soon show, and because shit shows like Dexter are getting to have the fun ahead of him, I'd prefer if he just lets Pushing Daisies rest in peace. I know we're all looking for more Pushing Daisies in our lives, but to paraphrase a line from the show, it's possible that what we've been looking for has changed too much to ever be found.
Time for my next trick.
With a bit of showmanship, if you don't mind.
Now you see me.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them spring.